The 2026 FIFA World Cup is over after 104 matches, 308 goals, 15 red cards, and one final that ultimately went the way of the tournament's most consistent team. Spain defeated Argentina 1-0 after extra time to become world champions. Ferran Torres scored the decisive goal in a final that was far more tense than spectacular. It was not necessarily the match that best represented the tournament as a whole. Much of this World Cup was open, unpredictable, and entertaining. The final was tighter, more cautious, and more attritional. But Spain's victory still felt appropriate. Welcome back, New England. I'm Lauren, and this is the Granite Slate Sports podcast. Spain may not have been the tournament's most explosive attacking team, but they were its most complete. They controlled matches, limited their opponents, and found ways to win without depending on one individual star to carry them. In this episode, we will look at why Spain deserved the trophy, which teams emerged as the tournament's biggest surprises, which traditional powers fell short, and what the United States should take from a promising campaign that ended in a heavy defeat. Spain entered the tournament as the top-ranked team in the world, and they ultimately justified that position. Their success was based less on overwhelming attacking brilliance and more on structure, control, and collective discipline. They did not simply hand a responsibility to one superstar and hope for a decisive moment. Instead, they functioned as a unit. That became especially important during the longest World Cup ever played. In a tournament requiring both physical endurance and emotional stability, Spain appeared better equipped than anyone else to manage the full journey. They contained opponents, stayed composed, and struck when opportunities appeared. Their route through the knockout stage included a 3-0 win over Austria, a narrow victory over Portugal, a 2-1 quarter-final win against Belgium, and a 2-0 victory over France in the semi-final. Then came Argentina. The defending champions had repeatedly survived difficult situations throughout the knockout rounds. They had been pulled into demanding matches and often responded only after falling behind or suffering a setback. But in the final, Argentina could not produce one more recovery. They failed to record a shot on target, and when Torres scored in extra time, there was no dramatic response. Spain were not always dazzling, but they were reliable. Over the course of such a long tournament, that mattered more. Their victory was also a reminder that international tournaments are not always won by the side with the most celebrated individual. Sometimes the strongest team is simply the one that functions best together. Argentina finished second, but their path to the final may have taken too much out of them. Two of their knockout matches required extra time, while two others featured late comeback victories. They defeated Cape Verde 3-2, came from behind to beat Egypt by the same score, and then defeated Switzerland 3-1 in the quarterfinals. In the semi-final, they beat England 2-1. By the time they reached the final, Argentina appeared to have little left. Whether the exhaustion was primarily physical, emotional, or a combination of both, they never managed to impose themselves against Spain. France were ranked as the third best team of the tournament despite officially finishing fourth. That assessment was based largely on the quality of their attacking football throughout much of the competition. With Kylian Mbappé, Michael Olise, Ousmane Dembélé, and others, France were capable of producing some of the tournament's most entertaining performances. They defeated Sweden 3-0, edged Paraguay, and then eliminated Morocco in the quarterfinals. However, Spain shut them out in the semi-final. France then lost an extraordinary third-place match against England, with England winning 6-4. England's fourth-place ranking reflected both what they achieved and what they left behind. It was their best World Cup performance since winning the tournament in 1966, as well as their best finish on foreign soil. Even so, there was a lingering sense that they had missed an opportunity. England took the lead against Argentina in the semi-final, but adopted an extremely defensive approach. Argentina eventually turned the match around and won 2-1. England then produced a much more aggressive attacking performance against France in the third-place match. That raised an obvious question. Had England shown the same ambition against Argentina, might they have reached the final? Their campaign was historic, but it was also one that left room for regret. Norway were among the most impressive stories of the World Cup. This was their first appearance in the tournament since 1998, and they reached the quarterfinals for the first time in their history. Their greatest result came against Brazil. Norway defeated the five-time champions 2-1 in the round of 16, extending an unusual record in which Brazil have still never beaten Norway in 5 meetings. Erling Haaland and Martin Odegaard represented the centre of a talented generation that now appears capable of making Norway a consistent international presence. Their quarter-final defeat against England was disappointing because Norway had periods in which they looked like the stronger side. However, they struggled to break England down after falling behind in extra time, particularly after Haaland was no longer on the pitch. Even so, Norway's overall tournament was a major success. Cape Verde produced an even less expected run. They opened by holding European champions Spain to a goalless draw. They then finished ahead of Uruguay and reached the round of 16 after drawing all 3 of their group matches. Against Argentina, Cape Verde twice came from behind before losing 3-2. Goalkeeper Vozinha became one of the breakout performers of the tournament, while fullback Sidney Lopez Cabral scored from an extremely difficult angle in a goal likely to be remembered among the competition's best. Egypt also made history. Before this tournament, they had regularly been described as one of the World Cup's great underachievers. This time, they recorded their first World Cup victory and then their first knockout stage win, defeating Australia on penalties. Against Argentina, Egypt led 2-0 and threatened to produce one of the tournament's biggest shocks. They eventually collapsed in the closing stages and lost 3-2, but their overall performance represented a significant breakthrough. Paraguay entered the tournament ranked 34th in the world and began with a 4-1 defeat against the United States. They recovered to eliminate Germany on penalties in the round of 32, one of the most significant results in Paraguayan football history. France proved too strong in the next round, but Paraguay still left the tournament with their reputation enhanced. Morocco failed to repeat their 2022 run to the semi-finals, but they became the first African nation to reach consecutive World Cup quarter-finals. They drew with Brazil, defeated the Netherlands on penalties, and eliminated Canada 3-0 before losing to France. That may not have matched their achievement 4 years earlier, but it confirmed that Morocco's previous success was not an isolated event. Canada also reached the knockout stage for the first time and earned the first World Cup point in the country's history. Their group was not especially strong, and their only victories came against Qatar and South Africa, but advancement still represented progress for a host nation that had invested heavily in preparing for the tournament. For the United States, the tournament was divided into 2 very different phases. The opening portion created genuine optimism. The Americans impressed in the group stage and then defeated Bosnia and Herzegovina 2-0 in the round of 32. That victory placed the United States in the final 16 on home soil and seemed to suggest the team was ready to take another step. The round of 16 match against Belgium changed that mood completely. The United States lost 4-1. It was not a narrow defeat decided by one mistake or one exceptional Belgian moment. The Americans were comprehensively beaten. Belgium had endured an inconsistent beginning to the tournament. They drew against Egypt and Iran and did not initially look like a serious contender. Their campaign transformed after they came back from 2-0 down against Senegal in the closing minutes of their round of 32 match. Belgium eventually won 3-2 after extra time. Against the United States, they looked like a fully developed team. Manager Rudy Garcia left Kevin De Bruyne and Jeremy Doku out of the starting lineup, yet Belgium still scored 4 times. That made the defeat even more sobering for the Americans. The United States had shown enough earlier in the competition to create expectations, but against one of Europe's stronger teams, the gap in quality became clear. The result also continued a poor American record against highly ranked European opposition. The Fowler and Balogun controversy added another layer to the defeat. Balogun had received a red card suspension, but that suspension was overturned, allowing him to play against Belgium. He later suggested that the controversy surrounding the decision may have affected his teammates. Whether that was a decisive factor or not, the American performance was far below the level they had established earlier in the tournament. That leaves the United States with a complicated verdict. Reaching the round of 16 and winning a knockout match represented real progress. The home crowd saw the team advance beyond the group stage and produce several encouraging performances. But a host nation also receives advantages that will not exist at every World Cup. The Americans were playing in familiar conditions, avoiding the travel demands faced by many visitors, and competing with an enormous amount of domestic attention behind them. The final match, therefore, matters. A 4-1 defeat demonstrated that the United States still has work to do before it can consistently challenge the strongest international teams. The tournament was not a failure, but it did not become the breakthrough many hoped it would be. The United States proved it could reach the later stages. It did not prove it could compete with the best teams once it got there. Several traditional powers left the World Cup much earlier than expected. Brazil ranked only 16th after losing to Norway in the round of 16. Carlo Ancelotti had been hired to restore stability and bring a serial winner's mentality to the national team. It was not enough. Brazil appeared passive against Norway and failed to control the match. Neymar made a late appearance and scored a consolation penalty, but his final contribution was overshadowed by confrontations with Norway's goalkeeper Ørjan Nyland and captain Martin Ødegaard. The defeat extended Brazil's World Cup drought. By the next tournament, the five-time champions will have gone 28 years without lifting the trophy, the longest such period in their history. Portugal also underachieved. Despite having a squad filled with recognized talent, their only truly dominant performance came in a 5-0 win over tournament debutants Uzbekistan. Portugal narrowly defeated Croatia before losing 1-0 to Spain in the round of 16. Cristiano Ronaldo scored at a record 6th World Cup and recorded his first knockout stage goal, a penalty against Croatia. But he struggled to influence matches from open play. The tournament appears to have been his final World Cup, and Portugal's campaign raised questions about whether the team had been too dependent on his status and reputation. Germany suffered another early exit. They began it with promising group stage performances, including a 7-1 victory over Curaçao and a late win against Ivory Coast. However, they lost their final group match against Ecuador and were then eliminated by Paraguay in the round of 32. Germany may feel frustrated by an extra-time goal that was disallowed, but the match should never have reached that point. This became their third consecutive disappointing World Cup following group stage exits in 2018 and 2022. It was also their first penalty shootout defeat in World Cup history. Julian Nagelsmann left his position as head coach after the tournament. Turkey and Uruguay were two more major disappointments. Turkey entered with expectations of advancing ahead of Australia and Paraguay, but were eliminated with a match still to play. They defeated the United States in their final group match, but the result came too late. Uruguay failed to win a match they drew with Saudi Arabia and Cape Verde before losing to Spain in a final group game they needed to win. A goalkeeping mistake and a red card completed a campaign in which they never displayed the quality they had shown during qualification. At the other end of the rankings, Qatar, Iraq, and Tunisia endured particularly difficult tournaments. Qatar earned a point against Switzerland, but then lost 6-0 to Canada in a match that included 2 red cards. They were eliminated after a 3-1 defeat against Bosnia and Herzegovina. Iraq struggled against a group containing France, Norway, and Senegal. Their main positive moment was captain Ayman Hussein's goal against Norway. They finished with 3 defeats, including a 5-0 loss in their final match, and recorded the tournament's worst goal difference. Tunisia were ranked last. They opened with a 5-1 loss to Sweden and dismissed manager Sabri Lamouchi. His replacement, Hervé Renard, could not reverse the situation. Further heavy defeats against Japan and the Netherlands left Tunisia with a -10 goal difference and no meaningful positive result to take from the tournament. The 2026 World Cup will be remembered in several different ways. It was the first edition with 48 teams. It featured 104 matches and the best goals per game ratio since 1970. It produced historic progress for nations including Norway, Cape Verde, Egypt, Canada, and DR Congo. It also produced further disappointment for Brazil, Germany, Portugal, and Uruguay. For the United States, it offered evidence of improvement, but also a reminder of the distance still separating the Americans from the strongest European teams. They won a knockout match and reached the final 16, but their campaign ended with a defeat that exposed serious limitations. And at the center of everything was Spain. They were not dependent on one player, one dramatic comeback, or one moment of individual genius. They were organized, consistent, and difficult to disrupt. Over the longest World Cup ever played, the strongest collective proved to be the last team standing. Spain were not only the champions, they were worthy champions. That will do it for this week's Granite Slate Sports Podcast. Be sure to check back next week to get the latest sports analysis and commentary on YouTube, Rumble, and graniteslate.news.